In My Hero Academia Chapter 423, One for All versus All for One, the fate of the world is finally decided. Rocketing down with a single unnamed meteoric punch, Deku uprooted the cataclysmic form of the Demon King, All for One. As his fist crashed into the villain's body, forcing blood out of his handhole, All for One wondered why he hadn't noticed something sooner. Something was very wrong with his overworked body. It wasn't using its super regeneration at all. As he looked at Deku's intense expression, he wondered if the boy was responsible, but quickly corrected himself. Shifting his attention towards the petty insects beneath them, he believed that the ants had a plan to devour him all along. Mina, Ojiro, Koda, Shoji, Sato, Kirishima, Bondo, Shihai, Ryuko, Tetsu, Kendo, Yuyu, Sero, Tsu, Toru, Ibara, Shishida, Snipe, Aoyama, Mineta, Kaminari, Jiro, Momo, and Ida. Everyone's fury and animosity coalesced behind Deku and was aimed towards All for One. Alone, they weren't even enough to trigger the Demon King's Danger Sense quirk, but together, they overwhelmed it to a debilitating extent. When the previous users of One for All struck at the core of the quirk, it didn't just impact the villain's soul. The damage cascaded to his body as well. During his initial training to become a vessel for the quirk, All Might told Deku that if he wasn't ready for it, his limbs would pop off. And now, with a filth-smeared face and the final embers of a heroic legacy spanning 9 generations, Deku told the monster how he'd made All Might's gift even stronger. Forcibly receiving this raw crystallization of power from Deku was far more than the evil vessel could bear. Deku's fist pushed the villain back as his torso broke from the force. All for One's body began to crumple like a piece of tissue paper in the midst of a raging hurricane. The effects of Deku's attack could be seen all throughout the battlefield as a maelstrom of demonic appendages ceased all movement. Looking over his shoulder as they fell apart, Yoshindo could tell that the quirks of the Master Manipulator were fading away. An exasperated Kirishima wondered if his friend had finally finished the fight. All for One's body began to go with the wind, but the undying fiend utterly refused to accept this outcome. As Deku fell back from the force of his own attack, he realized that All for One was using his quirks to forcibly maintain the integrity of his crumbling form. As far as he was concerned, their fight was not over yet, and nothing would be taken away from him. Derangement overtook his gaze as he proclaimed that his dream alone would be realized. He wouldn't allow anything else to be inherited or passed down, as he was the one and only Demon King. Deku looked down towards his friends in horror. The freak realized that all he needed to do was repeat the cycle just as he had with Shigaraki. With Deku now being quirkless, he figured he could use him or anyone else. Elongated hands began to emerge from the crumbling tendrils. They reached out towards the likes of Mineta, Ojiro, Tsu, and Kendo. He now sought to transfer his quirk to one of them and overtake their body. Lashing out, the unrelenting parasite clung to the desperate hope of securing a new vessel. Infuriated by the attempt, Deku demanded that All for One stop. A fearful Eraserhead cried out to Deku. He needed to finish things now. Just then, Kurogiri swiftly began to move. President Mike turned back in shock and confusion. The student turned Nomu looked up at the fleeting remains of his consciousness as Deku hurtled towards the body of his charge. He shakily called out the names of his old friends before warping with an apology. Thinking of the time he spent with Shigaraki, he knew that he needed to go. A portal appeared and intercepted Deku's supercharged fist. The bartending shadow's primary function beckoned him to protect Shigaraki Tomura. President Mike could only sound off from below as he expected this sort of thing to happen, because no matter where, like a true hero, his old buddy Shirakumo would always reach out to those in need. And for those of you who have never read the Vigilante spin-off manga or watched our old video on it, Shirakumo died in place of Aizawa while saving a bunch of preschoolers during a villain attack. His rescuing of cats was even inherited by Aizawa later on. The Shadow Zombie asked All for One to give back Shigaraki. He then began to remember the very thing that woke him up during this war, the desperate plea of Spinner for them to save Tomura. Deku remained frustrated while punching through the portal. Kurogiri told the villain that Shigaraki's friends were waiting for him, just as an explosive light detonated in close proximity. It was Bakugo! He dismissed the warp portal with an explosive bite attack. As on account of his quirk awakening, his explosions are no longer limited to just the palms of his hands. Although, there aren't any sweat glands in the mouth, so how the hell he did this is beyond me. But regardless, Deku's fist was now free to find purchase elsewhere. Present Mike couldn't believe his eyes. Bakugo just killed All For One's original body a few minutes ago. Dynamite refused to go to the hospital, and arrived just in the nick of time thanks to his explosions. That seemingly random Shoto shot from the previous chapter was actually him creating an icy ramp for the heroic delinquent's dynamic entry. As he fell back down to Earth, Bakugo called out to Izuku and claimed that he'd better watch out or he'd surpass him, which is very much a Dragon Ball Super era Vegeta thing to say. Rising to the occasion, Deku reminded All For One that he would never forgive him. As he fanned the final flames of his power, Deku let his adversary know that he didn't believe that he wasn't some incomprehensible monster. The villain insisted that he stop. Deku wouldn't even acknowledge him as a demon king. The villain refused to be looked at. As his fist finally hit its mark, he shouted that the villain was just a truly lonely man. Internally, All For One's attention shifted within the endless void. The thumb-faced tyrant was speechless for a moment as he noticed a tiny wisp of light begin to materialize. He recognized it to be his brother Yoichi. His younger sibling told him that Deku left a little behind before the transfer, seemingly having adjusted his power. Although, it is a bit odd to me considering he didn't see this All For One emergence coming, but whatever. Regardless, the initial collision of Deku's embers with All For One's body was enough to wake him up. Very little remained of the first user. It was clear to the eternally frail man that Deku really wanted to complete the story of One For All in the right way. Clinging to the minuscule form, All For One shouted that he didn't mind it. Even this was acceptable. He begged his brother not to go and to show his face. But as he flickered between his brother's palms, Yoichi admitted that such a thing was impossible now. He was disappearing. All For One's face returned as he shouted his refusal. He demanded that his brother, his very first and most precious possession, show himself immediately. As All For One also began to fade, Yoichi told his older brother that he wasn't able to guide him. Deku noticed this and was now offering them this final salvation. Even still, All For One refused to accept the reality of his defeat and professed his love for his only family member. He claimed that his love was true and admitted to being nothing without him. In response, Yoichi told his brother that it was time for him to pay for the crime of using so many people for his own nefarious motives. And Yoichi wasn't the only one that Deku woke up. As to emerge from the void were the cocked-back fists of 5 One For All users and the extended hand of Shigaraki Tomura. From both inside and out, the many wielders of One For All converged their fists of retribution to finally annihilate the stubborn stain that is All For One, once and for all. Afterwards, the bloodied fist of Deku met the fading and loosened grip of Shigaraki Tomura. Perhaps this moment of solidarity may also serve as the return of One For All, as an inversion of Deku's previously forced transfer. But I'm more inclined to believe that this may very well be a transfer of All For One. Doing so with the quirk should be possible considering they eliminated All For One's spirit just before. After all, he was believed to have been removed from it previously, so it's not as if his mind is a necessary component of the quirk. Yoichi himself admitted that the quirk had the potential to be the kindest power in the world. The issue of the quirk singularity still remains despite all of this. And in the case of characters like Oyama or even Spinner, quirk volatility is still an issue to be dealt with. Shigaraki admitted that after he was overtaken by his master, he believed it was the end. But it was his grandmother Shimura that made sure he wouldn't disappear. She granted him a moment of redemption and retribution. Shigaraki then thought of Kurogiri, who gave what little remained of himself to protect him. The final Shimura mentioned how he managed to get his body back, but failed to destroy anything. He admitted to being nothing more than the crying brat Deku said he was. In the end, although Deku may have lost his arms, Shigaraki failed to destroy Deku's willingness to extend a hand. Deku told his fated foe that he fought because he couldn't forgive what the villain had done. He wanted to stop him because he knew that Shigaraki wanted to be stopped. He wouldn't allow his sadness to be passed on to others. The villainous foil chuckled. Then, he asked Deku to deliver a message to Spinner for him if he's still alive. That Tomura Shigaraki fought until the end to destroy. And as far as Deku was concerned, Shigaraki succeeded. Together, they destroyed a source of pain that had been plaguing their world since the advent of quirks. Deku's final punch reduced the blight of a man to nothing but dust in the wind, the gust of which was strong enough to part the historic storm clouds above them to reveal the brightness and warmth of the sun. This is the conclusion of a conflict spanning more than 100 years. Izuku Midoriya, the hero called Deku, has officially saved the world. Now, I certainly wasn't expecting the final villain of the series to fall after only 2 hits, but admittedly, it's not an unbelievable development for this series. Ultimately, My Hero Academia is not very good when it comes to fights in the conventional sense. It lacks the choreography of Jujutsu Kaisen, the variety of Naruto, the multi-layered power system of One Piece, the mechanical depth of Hunter x Hunter. Its strong suit is, and has always been, emotional sentiment. And on that front at least, this conclusion was very meaningful. Granted, considering All For One's countless sins, I would have loved to have seen them stomp him out a bit more spectacularly, but I guess that wouldn't be very heroic. At the very least, considering his importance to the story, more than 2 pages would have been nice for Shigaraki's send-off, but it's fine. By popular shonen standards, this was a very pitiful showing for a final villain. But even still, I am very proud of all these characters and the messages that Horikoshi has managed to convey. All For One talked a lot of trash about Deku, but in this era, in Deku's era, Mr. Thumb doesn't have a single personal kill to his name. So who's the real failure here? Guys, at most we are looking at something like 3 more chapters of this series. So with that in mind, I would love to know what you think about it as a whole and what you'd like to see from this final victory lap of this series. We are almost there. As always, I am Sliceable Otaku. Thank you all so much for watching and have an awesome day. I love you.